I am being watched. Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest Season 2, Episode 2. It's called Bad Code. So spoilers for the episode as always. This one runs right off of the last episode. It's Reese taking Carter to go to Texas and investigate this girl who, the assumption is at the start that this is probably Root. That was what I said at the end of the last episode. I will say quite early on in this one, I said to myself, no, it's not her. She's connected to her clearly, but this is too much of an obvious swerve that it's not really her. And it gives us the sad, tragic ending that this girl did actually just get abducted and murdered, possibly more, that they don't want to imply because it'd be too dark for a network TV show. That's fine. Like, I have no problems with that. I enjoyed the way that it kept returning to just, because it's basically just one scene in this library right before she disappears that it just keeps going back to. Every time we get a new bit of information, we see it play out from a slightly different perspective. We see the other kids that are there. We see the librarian, and then this man who's checking out a book, who's I wouldn't say that he's flirting with the librarian, but they've got a chemistry, so it wasn't a surprise later on when it turned out they were married later. So the episode is very good, of course. All the Finch stuff with Root again is great. I think the building between the two stories worked especially well when it came to the episode's main theme and title, which was Bad Code. And the idea that the bad code is not referring to a computer, it's referring to human beings, and that they are the bad code. That's how Root refers to, what's his name? Denton Weeks, who someone did point out in the comments. I did see him before. He was the one that Alicia convinced to take the machine from Ingram. The episode kind of actually reminds you of that in this episode anyway. Root says at one point that he's the one who bought the machine for $1. So, that out of the way, all the stuff with them is really good. But the thing with the bad code is that, obviously, when she refers to him having bad code, or she brings up the concept of human beings being the bad code, and then says, see, he's got bad code later on when he, is kind of an asshole. That works okay, but what really made this all click for me was the fact that the bad code analogy was working way better for the other plot. And I felt like the bad code in this case wasn't so much the perpetrator. It wasn't so much the guy, the husband, the one who abducted this girl Hannah when she was 13 or 14. He wasn't the bad, and I'm not saying that he isn't in bad code. Obviously he's bad, but what I mean is, for me, the analogy of bad code worked much better with his wife, the librarian, because the big reveal when we get to it, and we're getting closer to the truth, and they've interviewed the librarian in Texas, they've talked to the police, although the police weren't very helpful because Carter's not very forthcoming with her information, so he's not, the other cop's not playing ball. But they get to the point where they track down a bank account, because the father of Hannah is still getting these credit card junk mail things every so often in Hannah's name, which is strange because she was too young and didn't have a bank account before she went missing. So they look into that. I actually, when we got to the reveals later on, because it became quite clear that either Hannah is Root or whoever is Root is intentionally still poking at the truth that happened in this town. And I thought later on that because the dad wasn't guilty of anything, that it was a bit strange that Root was sending him these weird statement things. However, after 2 seconds of thinking about it, I realized that she's not doing that. The credit card junk mail that he's getting in his daughter's name is purely just automated because she happens to have a bank account. The bank account itself was an intentional thing done by Root, as was the books that have been sent to the widow of the killer. The librarian lady keeps getting sent these books, and the date that Hannah went missing every year, she gets another copy of this book, which was the book that Hannah was checking out of the library the night she disappeared. So that's clearly this sort of poking at the truth and a reminder of what happened here. But what I was getting at is the idea of the bad code, to me, speaks to the librarian, because so much of what we've been talking about in this show in the last few episodes, towards the end of season 1 and then the premiere of season 2, is the idea of choice, and the idea specifically of the machine possibly making a choice, and how much of a life that sort of confirms that it may or may not be, is the idea of making choices. And I felt like, to me, the bad code here with the librarian was that she made a choice when she basically found out the truth about her husband. And it wasn't even her husband at the time. They weren't a thing yet, I don't think. But she actually heard from the main witness, who turns out to be Root, the other girl who was there in the library that night. She hears that she saw the car and the license plate, and that it's him, that it's this guy that she's in love with. And she made the choice to tell the girl to not tell anyone that she was a lying little so-and-so, and that she better not spread any filth like that, because he's such a kind, nice man and part of the community and all that stuff. She tries to scare her down. Obviously, this girl goes on to be Root, so I wouldn't say she got scared away. She just used different tactics effectively to achieve her means, namely putting a bank account in Hannah's name with a joint signature from the killer, which then has money put into it that's actually stolen from a gang, like a drug kingpin. So then they come and kill him. So he's been dead for 15 years because they wanted revenge for whoever stole their money, and because his name was on it, they came and killed him. And that was obviously Root's way of getting revenge on the killer. And then the books that she's sending to the wife every year are a reminder of what she said to her, that she covered for this man, despite the fact that this was glaring evidence that he might be responsible. Now, the wife doesn't necessarily know for sure. Deep down, I think she does, but it's just like this sort of like feigning ignorance and ignoring the signs, ignoring the red flags because she likes this man. I think that, to me, that choice that she made not to turn them in, not to tell the police, not to listen to Root, young Root, I think that is the example of bad code. That is the example of someone making a poor choice, because so much of the show is about characters making these choices, right down to Ingram making the choice to put in the back door when Harold was not making that choice. Reese obviously asking the machine to help. Things like that. Like, there's so much in this that's, even way back, that great episode, like 4 episodes in, with the sister looking for revenge, and then the choice to kill or not, and then that episode even ending with the did Reese kill him or not. So much of this show is about choices, and I'm sure you could probably boil any story down to being about that. But I think because we have been really like hitting that hard these last few episodes, or at least I have when I've been talking about it, is that really stuck out to me as the key thing here. This was the human error. This was, she cared about someone and made the wrong choice based on her feelings. And that introduces a concept here that is the machine immune from that? Arguably, it's not. And that was the whole thing with the flashbacks with Finch last week, is that it was looking out for Finch. Now, that may not necessarily be favoritism, it's just doing the right thing because it sees that he's about to be hurt and intervenes, as it were, which ironically is what Finch is now doing with all the numbers. He's helping intervene where he can. But I thought that was an interesting way of looking at that character, and then that idea of the idea of the bad code. It's not so much that some humans are bad necessarily, although that's how Root kind of means it when she's talking about Denton. It's more that people who are otherwise good might make a choice that is very much the evil choice, or the corrupt choice for a reason, because they care about someone else, because they're influenced by feelings or bias that stops them from doing the right thing in the moment. So you can empathize with them to a point. That said, though, I mean, it takes a lot to empathize with someone who's covered up for a child murderer, but you can empathize with a point to, okay, she had reasons for this, and it's this guilty thing she's been living with all this time. And hell, Root even thanks Reese at the end of the episode on the phone for finding her friend and, leading to a proper burial and justice of some sort, at least. I think that's a cool idea. And that also ties in wonderfully with the payoff to all the bad code talk, which is that when Reese finds them at the train station, with a little bit of help, of course, as along the way, is the idea that Finch says out loud to Root, he proves you wrong. Reese has proved you wrong. He's proven you wrong that not all humans are bad code. This idea that he is this heroic character, he's going to do the right thing, and he wasn't supposed to. Finch even says, I was not expecting you to come save me. His whole plan was just to have a contingency where the machine would keep giving him numbers, and even kind of chastises Reese for, why are you here saving me? Other people need your help. I'm not important. And of course Reese is like, no, he's like, you've saved my life, I'm going to save yours. And again, it's this idea that, to contrast with the plot with the killer and the wife, is that Reese made this choice out of friendship, out of love, out of whatever you want to call it. But in this case, it was the morally correct reason. It's like not to just leave him out to dry. This was to go and save him. And so it's very fulfilling when it does. Obviously, I've been really enjoying the friendship between them, and the idea that we're almost at basic full-on bromance at this point in their own weird way is just kind of beautiful. Loved all that stuff. That's sort of the big broad thematic thing of the episode. I've noticed more recently I've been jumping into the big thematics and then sort of going back and talking about any individual plot lines or scenes that I want to delve into. But yeah, I really dug all that stuff. I thought it was really well it was really well written throughout the episode, but not always in the plot that I felt like it was actually affecting the most. And that was actually really neat, because when I realized the connections with the other plot, it made it feel more fulfilling to me, because I was connecting the strings together on the murder board myself. I was connecting those themes, and it felt like a very rewarding experience as an episode because of that. I always say it, the best stories put out the hand, but they don't force your hand. They don't grab your hand and shake it. They put out your hand and you have to reach out and shake it. You have to be a part of the process. And I think, not in terms of understanding plot, although someone like David Lynch might dabble in that, and that can be its own exhilarating ride. But for the most part, it's not really about plot details I'm talking about. It's more about like the subtext and the themes and things like that, where you have to want to engage with it. And I feel like this episode was rewarding me very efficiently in how it was feeding me back information and sort of how that was relating to the other storylines. Yeah, just to go back, it was a fun scene early on with Carter and Fusco where Reese is just sort of spelling out what they're going to be doing. Gives Fusco the phone hack app, I'll just call it that, and he's very delighted by this. He's so impressed with himself later on when he actually uses it. He also has to babysit the dog. He's so proud, he wants to tell the dog, like, hey, I did it. I'm listening to this guy. Little does Fusco know, though, that the guy he's listening to is Hirsch, who I only remembered because I called him a henchman last episode, and I'm like, oh, Hirschman. I can use that. Henchman, Hirschman, Hirsch. That's my link. Until I just remember it naturally anyway. But he's investigating the Alicia stuff, and he's stealing evidence. Fusco's wondering where all the evidence is missing. He looks at Fusco at one point and says, yeah, I don't think the local police who are on the case are going to be a problem. But little does he know that Fusco's tapped his phone later on and is hearing a bunch of stuff and relaying it back to Reese. I think the threat of him going up against evil Reese is something else I might call Hirsch, because he kind of gives me that vibe, is, you know, just like how screwed he would be if he actually got into a fight. So it kind of had that little bit of the, you know, whenever Finch was almost in danger in season 1, I kind of feel like that here with Fusco, where I'm like, oh god, I hope you don't actually have to interact with this guy, because he's going to eat you for breakfast. And I've not even seen this guy fight yet. He may not actually be that good, but he's definitely presenting himself as a threat, and I can respect that. Carter and Reese, they're in Texas. There's a few funny moments, like Carter like questioning the sleeping arrangements because there's only one bed. It's hunting and fishing season, so there's tons of people taking up all the rooms, stuff like that. When Reese goes to talk to the boy who everyone suspected had killed Hannah, including her own dad, who apparently went and beat him up at one point, and that's why he's got a damaged eye. His eye's like swollen shut, basically, permanently, by the sounds of it. He ends up in a bar fight with a bunch of guys, and ultimately it doesn't really lead anywhere in the sense that he's not the killer, right? And Carter's already convinced of that for various reasons. When they go later on, though, when Reese is coming back to sort of try and trace the bank account and like if the credit cards have been used anywhere, and he ultimately gets the city that Finch and Root are in right now, he bumps into a couple of these guys from the bar again who try to fight him again, and he just wipes the floor with them. And I'm only mentioning all of this stuff because the punchline to this, the payoff to this, is when he's on the phone talking to the bank, they come in the door very sort of timidly and say, "Hey, buddy, we're cool, but we just want our stuff back." And Reese just holds up their crossbow and points it at them, and they just go, "Yeah, we're cool, and they back out the door slowly. It's just funny. It's one of the dry bits of humor that we get from Reese every once in a while, where he's just very deadpan with sort of thugs and people who want to fight him, and it's become a bit of a running gag on the show at a certain point, and I kind of am enjoying it. So that's all good. We have more investigation stuff, of course. Like I kind of glossed over the scenes where they talk to the librarian, who's the wife of who turns out to be the killer. And those scenes are fine. I really enjoyed as they were talking to her, it cutting back to that night and seeing the younger version. I thought they did a good job with the casting there to make her look similar, but obviously 30 years or 25 years at this point younger, because it's 1991 at this point. Oh, so yeah, 20 years, not 30. I'm stuck in like, because now it's about 30, but at the time it was about 20. I enjoyed the way they handled all that, and they do this nice little reveal. Actually, one of the ways they show you, it's already pretty. I think most people are pretty confident that this other girl who's there that night is Root, and especially at one point Hannah's playing Oregon Trail on the computer, cutting edge technology for 1991. It was questioned to by young Root, like, why do you play that? It's kind of dumb. She's like, because I'm going to get to Oregon. And the payoff to this later is that Root sits down and like quickly wins the game by doing some hacking stuff and wins immediately. And the very final moment of the episode is her putting in her name for the high score, and she puts in Root, which is a fun little moment at the end. I don't think you need it to actually tell us that she's Root. At this point, we've already sort of like revealed it and double checked it. So this is like a triple check to actually see her write the name Root into the computer. So it's not needed from a exposition point of view at this point. We're pretty confident on this. But it's a stylistic little moment of her to show that she's good with the computers and all that. It was one of the things that I was getting is that once I sort of clicked that Hannah probably wasn't Root, the realization that Root was taunting. At first, I thought the dad because of the credit card things, but then clearly it was the librarian with the books. I kind of sort of said, oh yeah, like she probably just took that money and, you know, because that's the big question is where did this $100,000 that went into this bank account come from? And it's like, oh, it came from this drug dealer. That's a bit weird. And as soon as they said that, that was where it kind of clicked that, you know, whether Hannah's alive and she's Root or it's someone else, like this is clearly just her using her hacking skills. That's how someone who at the time would have been, I think this was like 2 years later, so she'd have been 16, something like that. All that stuff was entertaining. Like it's almost impossible to sit here and just recount all the breadcrumbs and how one led to the other because there was too many details to sit and try and say them all out. But it was really fun watching the pieces play out, and it was always presented in a very succinct way where I never felt lost. Like there's definitely been episodes where, probably the stock episode where it was the stock guy, where sometimes they lost me a little bit as to like the ins and outs of what was happening with the stocks and how one thing was affecting the other. And they're usually quite good about getting the information across because you have to assume that the audience doesn't know much about whatever the subject is. In this case, it really did a good job of like, okay, the bank account, the night she went missing, the potential suspects, like all this information was fed to us so like streamlined and never felt confusing or overwhelming. The fact that they were able to do that in like a 42-minute episode and have it feeling like there was a build and a conclusion that had emotional payoff but didn't feel like they were rushing to it unearned, like, and this was with all another subplot going the entire time with Finch himself and Root questioning Denton, and obviously she keeps referring to Finch being the one who built the machine, and Denton's hearing all this and he recognizes him, as the guy who was with Harold or with Ingram. I always do that. I always call him Harold for some reason. He recognizes Finch from like when he was with Ingram, like that one time. The thing is that he convinces Finch to help him, and Finch obviously thinks Root is kind of a psychopath at this point, so he does end up helping him. He bumps the table to give him the knife, but then this guy, when Root comes in and he attacks Root, Denton is overly vicious, right? He starts punching her in the face, and like, okay, one punch or whatever, because she was trying to kill him just to sort of subdue her, I guess, but then he starts kicking her in the stomach when she's lying on the floor, to the point where Finch even says stop. Like, he's disturbed by what he's seeing, and it's, revealing that this guy is not good. This guy, while he may not deserve what Root's doing to him necessarily, he is clearly not this moral character that Finch should feel good about having some connection to the machine. But he ends up trying to kill Finch. He asks Finch to confirm if the machines can be compromised, and he says no, as long as the location is hidden, it can't be done remotely. And then he points the gun at him and shoots. Luckily, this was all Root's plan to get him to talk. He fires the gun, but it doesn't go off because there's no ammo in it. And then Root just immediately stops playing dead and injects him with something. So, and I'm saying playing dead as a phrase. I'm not actually saying he thought she was dead. I think he just thought she was knocked out. But it's all a thing, and it's it leads to some fun moments here where Finch is trying to leave a message for Reese. I think one of my favorite little moments here, aside from him leaving the message, which Root mistakenly thinks he's trying to call for help. And she's like, hey, I already turned the phones off, or disconnected the phones, rather. But I actually already kind of got the inkling that, oh no, that's not quite what he was doing. That did not look like a phone number he was dialing in there. And sure enough, when Reese gets there, he recognizes it as code. There's a name for it. I can't remember what he called it, but it's like an actual proper cipher. And he sits down, and it works out that it says train station, so he knows to go to the train station. But one of my favorite things about this little section is that while Root's getting ready to leave with Harold, and she's got him drugged up so that he's a bit docile and whatnot, she gets a text on her phone that there was a credit check on the credit card she's been using in the area. And like, I love that she gets it immediately. She's like, oh, I underestimated your friend. He somehow did this. She just immediately jumps to the correct answer, so it makes Root look very smart. But then she pauses and goes, yeah, but like, how did, like, he had to know on some level, like, a name. He had to get to at least Hannah to figure out that I'm connected to that bank account in some way. And she immediately ponders, is the machine helping him? And it was interesting watching Finch's reaction to that statement. And I almost wonder if at some point there is going to be a question that Finch asks about how Reese got information from the machine that was irregular, that wasn't just the next number. I don't know if we are just to assume that conversation happens between the scenes. I mean, because I'm going to assume that he tells her all about who Root is and the backstory in Texas. Like, I'm sure he's just going to tell him all that. We can just assume that stuff. But I do wonder if that at least, even if he tells him between episodes and we don't get to see that conversation, I do wonder if that'll be referenced at some point, because it's kind of a big deal that the machine offered something up that was different than normal. That it was offering up information from an old case that the machine knew connected to Root in order for Reese to find Finch. And interestingly, this is kind of an example, once again, of the machine saving Finch, which was the very thing we saw in the flashback that Finch then told the machine it shouldn't do. So Reese convincing the machine to do so. I was saying last time how Reese was kind of almost deprogramming the sort of the not the bad code, but the more like coldly neutral code that Harold had put into it by telling it not to care about individuals, about him. This is actually a direct one-to-one here, where it saved Finch. Finch said, no, you shouldn't do that. And then in present day, Reese has convinced the machine to help save Finch, and he's done that. So I think that's just an interesting sort of 1-to-1 between this episode and last episode. So all this was very good. The showdown in the train station was fun. Just watching Reese trying to like get to them in time. Root noticing Reese is there and questioning how the hell did he find us, surmising that Finch must have done something. And I think what's interesting about this episode as a whole for Root is that it does give us a window into her character and does make us empathize with her outlook in life. Like, her outlook in this episode to life is that people in general are bad for the world, they're bad for whatever. And it's not like, once we get this backstory where her friend was abducted and killed, and then someone who was supposed to be this kind part of the community helped, however much she knew or didn't know, cover up the crime, and there was no justice as a result. There you can see why Root has the outlook she does on people. Because it wasn't even just the individual killer, it was the other person, the wife, who also had a hand in the moral outcome not coming to pass. It was obstructed by other people as well. So I think this idea that we can have some empathy for how Root sees the world is a very interesting extra layer to her character that makes her not just the sort of the psychotic hacker character, right? She had, so obviously last episode when she said she wanted to free the machine, that was a very interesting goal, and that sort of fleshed out her character a little bit because it was more than just I'm crazy and I want to do bad things. I think this further develops her character into, okay, this is someone who fundamentally was created by bad people around her and the bad things they did, not directly to her, but witnessing what happened to her friend and witnessing that what the people did around that has made her this cold. It's sent her down this path. And this show is so much about redemption, and we're seeing that constantly with Reese and Finch. They're both making up for past choices that they made or past situations that they found themselves in. With Reese, the choice that he made that he is ultimately always going to regret is to not stay with the love of his life, right? He went off and went, deep cover and did all that shady stuff, and instead of staying with her, and that led to her death. So obviously he also has guilt about some of the things that he did for the government and all these shady things, but I think that's the key thing that the key choice, if you want to boil it down to one choice, that was the moment that he went down that path and not the other. What's interesting about Root is that she's not just instantly, we can empathize with how she is the way she is, and we can maybe even say that she could be the biggest, most challenging case of redemption the show has. One, because she has been turned this jaded by society. I mean, in this episode, just to make good on the threat that she gave Finch that she would hurt innocent people if he tried to do anything, she almost shoots an innocent man, and then Finch is able to sort of throw himself at her to throw her off because he doesn't have much mobility, so it's the best he can do in the moment. But she was willing to kill this innocent man, and that's a really, like, that's a direct line that a character is going to cross or has crossed, right? Obviously she killed Denton earlier in the episode, but we're kind of okay with that by and large, because one, it showed us that he was not that innocent, and it showed us a lot of reasons why that's not going to hurt. But this was an innocent guy in the train. This was just someone working in the train station who was going to be killed. And the thing with that is that, okay, she's too far gone right now. We can't completely sympathize with her, and we can't, pardon the pun, root for her in quite the same way we can the other characters. But what we can root for is that the machine in turn might actually teach her that humans can be good down the line, or something like that. Like, it feels like in many ways, we've got the redemption of all these characters, we've got the redemption of Fusco. I've been talking about that since basically episode 1. I think it's interesting that Root might prove to be, and this is a long game thing, if it even happens. I don't know if Root is going to be redeemed by the end of this show. She could just keep going down further and further darker holes. But this is someone who has been messed up by the world around her, and she wasn't even like put in a position. You know, Reese was in a dangerous line of work. He went into like sort of bad stuff. Now, admittedly, that's not what actually ended up hurting, you know, the love of his life, whose name I can't remember right now, but yeah, her. Admittedly, that was like a more of a domestic thing, but he was in this world, right? He was in a world of danger. And Finch, likewise, he was in this world where he was building top secret stuff. He was already this recluse who would disguise his identity and all these things. Root was a kid in a town, and all this bad stuff happened around her before she even had a chance to fully grow up and materialize. So, like, all of this just paints to this idea of, like, on some level, we can understand why she has the look she does in the world, and as a result of that, we can now possibly gradually explore the ideas of trying to break that down and trying to break through to her on some level. Like, will she genuinely care about other people at some point? Maybe, maybe not. But either way, the idea that, like, we're dealing with these themes and this character who has become so cold that she is almost kind of robotic in a sense is very fascinating. And the idea that that her belief in the machine might almost ricochet back from the machine at one point if the machine is more moral than she is. Very interesting. Or alternatively, of course, she could be a horrible influence on the machine if she does try to influence it in some ways. Maybe the machine will have a rebel to look up to or something. I don't know. I'm waffling in big concepts at this point about the characters and where they're going to maybe go. But this show is making me do that a bit more and more, it seems, because the episodes are this meaty and they're this fulfilling in terms of larger ideas. This has been episode 2 of Person of Interest, season 2. It was very good. I'm enjoying the show immensely. Even seeing Carter and Fusco happy that Finch is back by the end was very nice. Root spying on Hirsch as they're dealing with her crime scene, also kind of interesting to see that she might be going after them. I don't know how much of Root we're going to see immediately. I think later in the show, Amy Acker was straight up just one of the regular cast members, meaning she's in like every episode at a certain point. But I don't know if that was the case in season 2. I don't know if she's just recurring in season 2, but obviously we're going to see her again. But it wouldn't surprise me if she's not in the next one. Or we may just have a little subplot for her almost every episode. I have no idea. But we'll find out next time on Person of Interest. So you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, and you can like, subscribe, all those things help out a lot on YouTube, help more people find the show. That's me. Thank you very much for joining the review. If you did, I'm just making assumptions now, but that's okay. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?